To do the roll call first. Give me a second. Going live, folks.
Oh, thank you. Except this is yours. Oh, inside is my stuff? Oh, look at you recycling. So
Good afternoon, and welcome to a special meeting of the Council of the City of Long Beach held Friday, April 8th, 2022 at 5 p.m. We'll have a roll call. Councilmember Posterly.
Whoops. Here.
Okay. Councilmember Lester. Here. Councilmember Bendo.
Present.
Vice President Treston.
Here.
President McGinnis.
Present.
Let the record indicate the presence of City Manager Donna Gaden and Corporation Counsel Richard Barrios. We'll now have a salute to the flag.
Vice President Treston, will you please say the pledge?
yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Friday at 5 o'clock. We can't thank you enough for participating and being here today, and also especially to the staff to hold off on your weekend.
Okay, first item is a resolution authorizing publication for hearing of an ordinance to amend the Code of Ordinances of the City of Long Beach regarding Ocean Beach Park. This item is for publication only. A hearing will be held April 19th at 7 p.m. here in City Hall. Item 2 is a resolution authorizing a collective bargaining agreement between the City of Long Beach and the Commanding Officers Association of Long Beach, New York, Incorporated.
Commissioner Walsh?
You also have the presentation in front of you.
I forgot mine too.
You just got it right up
Can you hear me okay? Good. You can go to the first slide if you want. So the presentation I'm about to give is a presentation on the main points of the collective bargaining agreement, proposed collective bargaining agreement between the city and the Commanding Officers Association. It doesn't cover every single provision of the contract. It covers the main points. The actual contract itself is going to be made available should this get ratified. So can we go to the next slide? So just in a way of some background, the COA was established in April of 2013 after the members of the then PBA, the lieutenant members, went through a process called decertification. They wanted to become their own collective bargaining unit. That's the date that they were actually awarded their own status as a collective bargaining unit. The PERB decision that created them, let me see if I can just straighten this out for everybody. It's a little better. The PERB decision that created them actually gave them all of the terms and conditions of employment of the then current PBA contract and all of the applicable MOAs and other decisions that in effect applied to the COA unit. So there was all the history of the PBA that became the COA's current contract. This is the first time that the COA has actually ever had a mutually negotiated contract with the city. They've been around for over 9 years. I think it's some members have not had a contract, and some, I don't know, Bill, what does it say on your website? 5,029 days. So before I even get into this, it was a year in negotiation. There was a lot of tense moments, a lot of good moments. So it was a lot of give and take, back and forth. The current 3 members of the COA are in attendance. I personally want to thank them for working as hard as that they did. I want to thank the city council up to this point and the city manager for getting us to the point where we're actually presenting this particular agreement. Next slide. So these are some of the areas of focus that took into consideration the city's fiscal condition, and the manner in which we actually started to go into negotiation. We didn't want any retroactive payments. We wanted to fix structural cost centers, things that caused the cost of payouts and things like that to keep going up over time. Establishing a hard cap on separation payouts. We want to try to decrease our operational costs, increase the number of appearances for the members of the unit, get some training time built into the contract that we didn't have to pay overtime for, decreasing some operational costs for overtime, and increasing the ability to manage staff, moving the staff and having the staff have the ability to make agreements with the department to say, okay, I can work on this day, or I can work this particular chart, so long as it didn't fly in the face of the collective bargaining agreement itself. Next slide. So, these are the wage increases that are being proposed, and these are the years that they are being applied to. This contract covers 12 years. It should be looked at as these raises came in those years, and the union negotiated no retroactive payments, and the city held to that. So the total percentage of increase here is compounded 17.15% over 12 years. It's about 1.4% a year compounded or uncompounded. If you just take the numbers and you divide it into 12, you have 1.33% raise per year. Next slide, please. So, steps to top pay. In the current contract, you go from sergeant top pay to lieutenant top pay. Now there's 3 steps. So the city, in effect, saves 1/3 of the top pay of a new lieutenant when they get promoted. It takes 3 steps to get there. You get 1/3 for the first year, 1/3 on your first anniversary, 1/3 on your second anniversary. That's the way this is staged, saving the city money. Longevity payments. In the current contract, these are your longevity payments. Maxes out at $14,500 per year. The city felt that we were trying to work with a way to make that more reasonable, and we got ourselves to the new contract for any officer hired in the department. So as time goes on, when officers hired 2017 and beyond, that's already 5 years in the past, so they're coming up eventually, they're only going to get $3,000 of longevity from years 11 through 15, and then they max out at $5,000 of longevity year 16 and beyond. So it's a structural fix on slowing down the increase of costs over time. Next slide, please. Overtime management. So, overtime, we're going to go to the wheel? Okay, you just playing with me, Dave?
Sorry,
gotcha.
I went too far.
All right, so we're going to go to the wheel. There's a concept called the wheel, and then which we brought into the COA. Right now, overtime is assigned by the senior most officer for everything in the department. So I'll use police officers, for example. If there's overtime in post A today, the senior most person on the job gets the first whack at getting that overtime. They're the first person that can get the overtime. What the wheel does is it now takes in the amount of overtime a person has. So you go with the person who has the least amount of overtime in the department, gets offered the overtime first, and then it goes on up. So you go from the least to the most. Yes, thank you for this negotiation. Thank you very much for acknowledging that. So that will be something that will save money in this unit, and a stance that we're taking in our negotiations going forward. Next slide. Overtime management again. So when we're trying to assign people to specific details, instead of having to stay with seniority, we now have these new considerations. We can look at a detail and say, we want to use a particular officer who has shown a particular skill set in writing summonses, right? You've never written a summons, and this officer writes a lot of summonses, and we want to put a detail out for pulling cars over, right? That can now be taken into consideration. Additionally, what can be taken into consideration is specialized training. So if an officer has specialized training in an intoxilizer, a 9000, that's the machine we use to actually test somebody's breath. And we're trying to put out a DWI patrol. We now can say the officers who have that without any issues are the people that we're going to put into that, making it more efficient for us as well. The other thing that we have now is grants and outside funding. So for anything that is paid for monies outside of the city's budget, we can specifically select the officers best suited for that particular opportunity if it's paid for outside. It gives more managerial flexibility to the city, and yet still meets the ends and means of what the needs are for the city. Tour changes. Currently, if a member were to agree, okay, I'm going to work for you, Commissioner Walsh, on Saturday because you asked me to, even if that member said okay, the union could then turn around and say, nope, we are grieving that because any time an officer works outside of their prescribed tour must be paid overtime. We now have the flexibility with the officer if the officer agrees to that. To be fair, if an officer comes to me and says, hey boss, I really need to work Saturday instead of Friday because I have something going on, that's good of the command or good of the officer, we now can make the adjustment for the good of the member and say, okay, you can work on Saturday. We don't lose any time, we don't lose any operational, it doesn't cost us overtime to do it, but I can let the member switch their tour without the union grieving the issue. Next slide. Recall. This is a very complicated part of the current agreement. It's many, many pages long. We simplified it down. Here's the basic restructuring. If a member of this unit goes home and the bell rings and we have something that happens and we have to call them back in, that's called recall. It used to be they would get 9 hours of pay, 6 hours of overtime. I'm speaking in very general terms now, is what they would get. We've reduced that to 5 hours of overtime now, so a reduction of an hour, or 7.5 hours of pay. What it also comes up with, which is not up here, but I will say is, if I were to pick up the phone and call one of my lieutenants and say, this is going on, I need to talk to you about this, that automatically comes as potentially recall. What the COA has agreed to is, if I call them on the phone and I talk to them for up to 2 hours, it's just the straight 2 hours of pay on overtime. Okay, it's not the 5 hours, it's 2. If I go beyond that, then it switches into a recall provision. So it gives us, at the city, the operational flexibility to deal with the expertise of the members in the department and get them to be able to talk to us, and reduces the cost for the city. That's the design of it. The new contract also has court recall. We are constantly having officers who go to court. We make arrests, we go to court. That's the way it works. In the current contract, if a member is assigned to court, they automatically get called in for 4 hours, right? It's a 4 hours minimum. If court gets canceled, less than 72 hours notice, they get the right to come in for 4 hours of straight time pay, even if they're not going to court, okay? In the new contract, it's now reduced to 2 hours. They only guaranteed 2 hours of pay, and if they get called in, they have the option of working 2 hours straight time, or they could say, no, I'm just going to stay home, and it wouldn't cost the city anything. Okay, so it reduces the incentive for the officer to actually come into work when they're not going to testify, and it also reduces it from 3 days notification to 1 day, 24 hours. Next slide. Oh, go back one more. This is important. The other thing that we got is the department may change a member's tour of duty. Remember when I said they couldn't change, if you change the tour of duty, they get overtime? Well, we can now change their tour of duty up to 5 times a year for the purposes of going to court. So we can reduce overtime exposure for the department. Another very nice thing for the city. Go ahead. Chart days. Current members in the police department, they get these things called chart days. The reason these things were negotiated in many years ago was because the number of appearances that officers made was more when they're working certain charts. So we've negotiated, it didn't mean that they worked above the Fair Labor and Standard Act. It didn't mean any of that. It just means they had more appearances and were getting paid the same amount of money as someone who had less days to come to work. The hours were the same, but it was less days. So they got these things called chart days. What this did was, for the current members, they're going to maintain their 12 chart days that they get a year for a period of 5 years. On the 6th year, at the end of the 6th year, they're going to drop down to 6 chart days, and 3 years after that, they go to 0 chart days. Any new member of the Lieutenants Association, the Commanding Officers Association, immediately goes to 0 chart days. 12 more days of work, no more costs for the city. That's what that basically equates to. Next slide. Training days. In the current contract, there are no specific days that we can assign a member to go to training without paying them overtime. Current contract, you're working outside your tour of duty, you get paid overtime. In the new contract, we have up to 4 days now where the members of the association can get trained. We can take them, change their tour, put them in training, up to 10 hours, no cost to the city. One of those days can actually be a community service day. So I can take a training day, and we can assign officers from the COA now to work National Night Out, or go to a community meeting, or attend a civic association meeting, or there's a fair on the boardwalk, and I would like the lieutenant to attend and do community service work. We can assign that, and it's no additional cost to the city. The other thing that we have is a General Assembly. That's a day where we can order everybody on the department in, and they have to show up. I can trade a training day for a General Assembly. Currently, in the current contract, they get 3 hours of overtime for that. This would be no cost to the city. Next slide. Separation payout. So this is where we really fix the structural issues. The current members in the unit will get paid for their time on the books. Now, this is unlimited. For every day that goes by, the total amount of money in the contract keeps going up. They're allowed to save their personal time. They're allowed to keep it, and their terminal days keeps going up and up and up. What this contract does is takes all of the time of the current members, puts it into a locked time bank. They'll get paid out, locked in at the rate of pay when the contract goes into effect. It doesn't go up anymore. Okay, right now, as their raises keep going up, the value of the days keep going up, and it keeps getting more and more and more expensive for the city. This current contract, there's no cap. If you recall, or maybe you don't, I'll educate you, that the Regal decision that came out, the arbitration award that the city won against the PBA, doesn't apply to this unit. Okay? So we took the idea of Regal. They had a $275,000 cap for the PBA. We put a $325,000 cap in for the COA, that no member can ever go above $325,000 in payout. They could save up that much time. The interesting thing, too, is that with all the other time savings in here, on average, it will now take 25 and a half years for them to get to a $325,000 cap, whereas under the auspices of the old contract, it would only take 15 years. So the likelihood of a member getting enough time in to get a $325,000 payout is low. Much, much lower than the existing contract. Next slide. Oh, let me go back that one more time. The other thing about the current contract is that if one of the current members retired, all of their payout money has to be paid within 60 days. And that means the city has to bond. The new contract says we're going to pay the current members all of their time over 6 years in biweekly installments with no interest. So we're going to start to pay them in a much more affordable way for the city so that it doesn't impact the residents and the taxpayers as much, where you have to bond and then pay your interest on your bond and things like that. Next slide. Is this it? Yep. Okay. So all leave accruals paid over 6 years. No, the current members can never get an additional payout either. Everything gets locked, and that's what they get paid. So any time that they have on the books, if they have vacation time that they saved up, they're going to wind up having to use that before they leave or they lose it. Okay? That's a structural savings. All time that's carried over year to year becomes use or lose, as I just said, and also comp time. This is where a member works overtime and they save it as time. The current members can't do that anymore because they're getting paid out for it already. So if they work a day and they get paid for it on overtime, they get paid for the very next pay period. It doesn't keep building up overtime for the city. Their terminal days. These are days, well, go to the next slide, Dave. I believe it shows up on the next one. I'll get the terminal days. Yeah, here it is. So personal leave, accumulated time. At the current contract, each member of the COA gets 40 hours of personal time. That's what they get. They get 5 days of personal time every year that they can use. All right? Unlimited carryover. When I say that their current payouts were unlimited, they could just keep adding these 5 days on top of it. So 5 more days every year. On top of that, they also get terminal leave days. They get 6 days for working here every year called terminal days. Those get saved forever. So now that's 11 days a year. That just keeps going up and up every single year. Doesn't exist if this gets approved. Okay? The new members now only get 30 hours of personal leave time a year. Instead of 40, it went down to 30. And personal time can no longer be carried over to the next year. Personal time, if you have any left, in July, the second pay period, you get paid for it. It doesn't keep going up in value with raises. It's now, you paid for it second week in July, no more payouts at the end of your career. So another structural fix. Here's a real big savings. If you're hired on or before January of 17, you only get 5 terminal days until your 25th, is that right? 20th? Yeah, until your June 30th of 2017, you only get 5 personal days, and on your 25th year, you no longer accumulate personal days. That goes away. If you're hired after June 30th, 2017, those 5 days are reduced to 1. So if you hit for 30 days, you only get 30 years, you only get 30 total days of terminal time added on. If you're here for 10 years here under the current, you get 60 days. So it's a dramatic reduction in the amount of time that the payouts will go up, making it much more difficult to even get to the 325 that we've agreed upon. Next slide. Oh, if you're terminated for cause, by the way, meaning you've done something wrong and we fire you, all of your terminal days are wiped off the books. So that's something else in the contract. Next. Vacation time. Current members earn 240 hours annually of vacation time, and you can get paid for up to 50 of these when you're retired. The new contract. For members hired after, remember I said structurally, as people age through, the savings keep going up. If you're hired after June 30th, 2017, you now are restricted to 240 hours of, before June 30th, 2017, you still get the 240, but if you're hired after that, you're reduced to 160 hours. You only get 160 hours of vacation time as opposed to 240 if you're hired after June 30th, 2017. Maximum of 50 days can be accrued. It extends the time period dramatically because they're using their vacation time over time so that they're getting less days. It takes a lot longer for them to accumulate the time. Next slide, please. Okay, sick leave. In the current contract, there are 26 sick days a year, and sick days are not charged by the hour. So if a member were to show up and he's into his tour for an hour and he says, oh, my stomach hurts, and he goes home, that day's free. He gets charged the next day if he stays out. In the new contract, they're charged hour for hour. So if a member were to come in, he gets sick, and he says, you know what, I don't feel well, goes home for 7 hours, 7 hours come off of his sick time. We had members years ago who would take advantage of that provision regularly. 5 family sick days per year in the current contract. That's a provision that if my daughter or my son is sick or my wife is sick, I can stay home to care for them on sick leave. Those provisions have been taken out. If they want to call up and take a personal day, they can do that, or a vacation day, some sort of emergency, we can accommodate them that way, but they can't use sick time to do that any longer. That's been taken out. So the new contract, For the members hired prior to 2017, they're going to stay with 26 days. If you're hired after 2017, you're only getting 15 sick days or 120 hours, a dramatic reduction in the amount of time that they earn. Now, I said already they get it hour for hour. There's an incentive now to incentivize members to come to work. If you don't take any sick time, we're going to give you 40 hours, and we're going to pay it for you in July. If you take an hour of sick time, we're going to reduce your incentive by an hour too. So for every hour that a member uses going sick, it costs them 2 hours of pay in July. So it's an incentive to come to work. It's a lot more expensive to pay and backfill in overtime than it is for an officer to come in and us to give them a provision like this. Next slide. Excessive sick leave user program. This was something that we focused on very aggressively. So right now, if a member goes sick, he can go sick today, he can go sick tomorrow, and then he come back to work for a day, and he can go sick 3 days later, and there's really no penalty per se for that. In the new contract, if you go sick twice within a 3-month period, you're designated an excessive sick leave user. If you go sick 3 times in a rolling year, within a year period of time, you are also considered an excessive sick leave user. What does that mean? It means you are not eligible for overtime without the Commissioner of Police's permission. Monetary incentive not to go sick unless you're really sick. It also says you must stay in your residence when you're out sick, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Some exceptions to go to the doctor, pick up food, things like that. You have to call the desk and ask for permission to leave. You have to bring a doctor's note in, verifying that you were sick. And you have to speak with the police surgeon in order to return to work. Or, if we say, nope, you can come in, talk to the surgeon the next day to get you back to work, we can do that as well. So it's a management so that we can reduce the use of frivolous sick time. Next slide. Meal allowance, okay. At the current time, if a member misses their meal, they get $7.50. And they get an hour put on the books in comp time that they can use to take off. If they work 12 hours, they get an additional hour put on the books. So that's 2 hours plus $7.50. If they work 12 hours in 1 minute, they get 2.5 hours put on the books in total, plus $7.50. These provisions were considered a little excessive. We negotiated. No more meal money. $7.50 is now removed. If you work and you miss a meal, no matter how long you work, you get an hour put on the books, and that's it. So it's about an hour and a half reduction in getting comp meal times, is what it's called, saving the city additional time, because every time they take off, a member takes off, we usually have to backfill that with overtime. So another savings. And last but not least, we have combined Lincoln's and Washington's birthday into Lincoln's Washington birthday into President's Day and created the new Juneteenth holiday. That's a no-cost item, but it recognizes an important milestone in American history. And our last slide. So we spent some time with our consultants. I worked with Ms. Resnick, our comptroller, and we did some computations of, as reality-based as we could, what will this save? In retroactive payments, to the city is saving $3.7 million. So if you go back in time to the very first day of this contract and calculate all of the provisions in this contract, and I didn't talk about them all here, you'll come up with $3.7 million worth of savings. If you then take the go-forward period in the contract, the time that from basically today forward, you're going to save $3.8 million in total. And then the total amount of savings here is $7.5 million of dollars that we either would not have an increase or actual savings. So there's an illustrious period, we call it. What happens even after that, when the 2017 members get hired? There's even more savings into the future, but the calculations get extremely difficult to explain. but there's even more savings than what's explained here. It's a very cost-effective way to manage the city. It's fair to this unit. It gives the city much more ability to actually manage the police department, and it also brings this unit current. Like I said, I don't think the PBA has had a negotiated contract since 2008, if I'm correct. This unit, since their inception, it puts us on a new road, and this contract goes through 2025. We have labor harmony with the COA when and if this gets ratified. I now will entertain any questions from the council. You want to drop the screen for me, Dave?
Thank you, Police Commissioner Walsh. Any questions from the council?
I did.
Mr. Bendo, do you have any questions?
Sure, I'll come up with one.
I would also like to just say, too, for the benefit of the listening public, is that we had a very long executive session with the City Council, walking through the entire contract in a very extensive PowerPoint, and a lot of questions and answers were given. So I just wanted everyone to know, we can't discuss negotiations because it still has not been ratified, but we can start to explain the results of that negotiation as we stand now.
Thank you, Ron. And Mr. Lester brought food for our two-hour plus meeting, so thank you to you for that too, when we had our specific meeting on it.
I don't understand what you're saying.
We had an extensive executive session for the council on this negotiation. Police Commissioner Walsh was there. He answered numerous questions. And all I said was that Council Member Lester was kind enough to bring food for us at that meeting. You're welcome. Council Member Bendo.
To President McGinnis's point, we've already had a lot of our questions answered, but the current contract, if this is ratified, calls for a minimum number of lieutenants.
Yes.
And then in a couple of years, it'll add one additional lieutenant.
Correct. I can walk through that if you'd like me to.
Now, also in there, as you pointed out, anybody who was hired prior to 2017 and moves up into the COA pops the cap of the Regal arbitration.
Right. So, you want me to explain both of those to the listening public?
If you'd like.
All right. So, what, Councilman Bendo? Oh, you want me
Well,
to
no,
first?
there's
Okay.
a question in
Okay.
there.
All right.
So, based on historical and anticipated staffing in the COA, what percentage of people that are now under that Regal arbitration in the PBA could we anticipate may enter the COA and now have that cap limit lifted?
Okay. So, at the current time, I have a need for 3 lieutenants to make the management of the department manageable. Okay, more manageable, meaning I can actually sleep beyond 6 o'clock in the morning one day. So, or actually get a full night's sleep. So, if we were to hire meaning promote, anybody who's on the lieutenant's list now, and this was not ratified, the $275,000 cap that's in the Regal decision would be called popped. There would no longer be a cap on them, and all of the time that they have saved up would now be subject to full payment. So if I had a member that is 1,000 hours over the 275, I'd now have to pay for those the city, not me, the city would now have to pay the 1,000 hours at their current hourly rate. So take raw numbers, if it was $100 an hour, it's $100,000 the day they get promoted on top of the raises that they would get, which would be an immediate jump to top pay. So the structural fix in this contract is that it eliminates the popping of the cap, and it now has 3 steps to go to top pay, elongating the savings for the city, short-term and long-term. Does that make sense? And you want to know percentage-wise?
Well, but there are people currently in the PBA,
Correct.
if promoted, would be eligible to have the cap popped.
That's correct.
And-
There are 4, because there are 4 on the list.
Okay, so it would really just be those 4?
It would be those 4, and I don't recall the numbers exactly of what it would cost if, but there was a rough number that we used of approximately $340,000 if, on average, it would cost the city additionally if I promoted them without this contract on day 1. That's a rough number. Don't hold me to it. It could be a little more, it could be a little less, but that's definitely the range because we know how much time those members already have in the bank. So we know what that's going to cost if they get promoted without this contract in place.
But, do you have a question? Oh. I'm looking at slide 12, and it says that the payout is 325 max.
Yes,
So the difference is 50 grand per person if you have new members.
that's if this goes in effect. If this
Yeah.
doesn't go in effect, the difference is between 275 and whatever they
And
have
infinity.
on the books. And infinity, because it keeps on building.
So
That's correct.
so you put in a carve out to make sure the delta is 50 grand.
The
Yes.
delta right now is 50 grand, and that was deducted on our projections going forward when people came up. Yes,
Okay, thank you.
yes.
Any other questions from the council? Mr. Lester?
I'm sorry, right now you have members that have, the termination pay that this does not apply to. They
At the current time,
locked in. And it wouldn't apply after the contract because they already have accrued that.
I'm sorry.
If somebody has separation pay
Correct.
available now.
Correct.
Of X amount of money,
Got it.
they're a member of the unit, and we enter into the new contract.
Correct.
That separation pay does not get taken from them. It's only the new ones that cannot accrue.
The current members of this unit
Yes.
are going to get paid for what they have on the books in
Right.
consideration of all of the provisions put into the contract. That's correct.
Yeah. Do we know what that amount is?
For the current members,
Yes. There are 3 current members or 4?
there are 3 current members. It's somewhere in the area of, it's above 2 million, it's less than 3 million.
Okay. And I just have to say something. I appreciate the amount of work you put in. I think this is a really good step forward. I think that you've looked at everything. Of course, there are lots of things that I think are overly generous, but, there's not much you can do with that. You're coming from a contract that was, in my opinion, overly generous. And so I think what you've done is excellent.
Thank you.
But my problem is it's a contract. And people should be able to see the contract before we vote. Now, in October of 2021, Governor Hochul changed the law, the open meetings law. And I just want to read what she had to say. At a minimum, I believe that every government agency in the state of New York that's subject to the open meetings law should provide this information because the best constituents we have are informed constituents. They have a right to know what's on the agenda. They have a right to contact their elected officials and to share their concerns. And in cases where that information is not available until the last minute or at the meeting, that denies the public what I believe they are rightly entitled to. Then we go to Mr. Wolf, who's the head of the State Coalition for Open Government. And he's talking about this amendment that was passed. Said there's no practicable reason why a public body with a website cannot scan and post online the board members' packet for their meeting. Posting documents 24 hours before a meeting is a step forward, but it really should be 48 or 72 hours before a meeting. It is sad that obtaining a 24-hour requirement is a victory, but that's how the New York open meetings law works. Then I'm reading from Anna Kaplan, who sponsored the legislation that changed the open meetings law. Public participation in open meetings is a cornerstone of our democracy and a vital opportunity for citizens to have their concerns heard and addressed by their representatives. In order for the public to have an opportunity for meaningful participation in the process, they need to have access to discussion materials in advance of any meetings. But unfortunately, too many public bodies in New York State are using a weakness in our current law to skirt this important requirement. It is time that every public body across the state adopt this common sense practice, and with this simple legislation, we will ensure that they do. In this particular case, while I think you've done a great job, great contract, I think the public is being shortchanged, and I think it's a violation of the new law that they have not been allowed to see the contract beforehand. Matter of fact, I don't even think were you able to give out the presentation you had, you gave us?
I don't know if it was made available. I sent it to you.
Because when I checked, it wasn't available.
I didn't make copies myself.
Yeah, all right. The law says, and I'll read you directly what the law says. If the agency which a public body functions maintains a regularly and routinely updated website and utilizes high-speed internet connections, such records, when they're talking about such records, they're talking about the contracts, the presentation, stuff like that. Such records shall be posted on the website to the extent practicable at least 24 hours before the meeting. Now, I know that we got our contracts more than 24 hours before the meeting, so they were available. Now, I have inquired why we can't wait till next Tuesday when we have an open meeting, when we have a regularly scheduled meeting, so that this can be in front of the public, where they can see the contract, where they can see your presentation, and where it's not a special meeting. And I really I have not received a good answer. But the way I read the...
I'm sorry, may I interrupt?
Please.
At this time, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to go into executive session because it sounds like you're going to talk about collective bargaining.
That I'm what?
You're going to talk about the collective bargaining within the contract.
Do I have a second?
I'd like to make a motion.
So I have a motion on the floor to go into executive session for the...
Do I have a second?
I just want clarity around that.
Mr. Lester is talking about the contract and contract negotiations.
Not, to
Didn't
my,
say a word
no,
about
he's
it.
talking about open meetings law.
Mr. Barrios?
So I just wanted you to finish what you were going to say, and then I can add some context, because I think...
Well, we have a motion on the floor, so let's...
Okay.
I second the motion.
It is.
The motion.
Motion to go into executive session to discuss a collective bargaining issue. Councilmember Apostoli.
I just wanted more clarity on that in general. I guess we can discuss it and come back out. Yes?
Councilmember Lester.
No,
Yes.
there's no reason for it.
Councilmember Bendo.
I'm going to say at this point, because I don't think we've got into the negotiation aspect, no.
Vice President Treston.
Yes.
President McGinnis.
Yes, at the risk of, so basically, a contract negotiation is a negotiation until the contract is signed. Therefore, I feel it is my responsibility to not jeopardize this negotiation, which is at a critical point right now, and I vote yes.
Okay, we're in executive session.
Am I invited into that executive session? Yep.
Want to go to the OEM, or you want to... Somebody got a key?
One second. For the folks watching at home, I'm going to end this live stream, and then we're going to start a new stream that will be titled City Council Meeting Part 2.
There you go.